What's up guys, Saf here on Super Saf TV and welcome to another Super Saf style camera comparison. This time it is between the Google Pixel 5 and the Samsung Galaxy S20 FE. These are priced similarly, so I thought it would be a good comparison to do. We're using the front-facing cameras on both devices, but we'll be testing out all aspects of the cameras, front-facing, rear-facing, images, video, low light. Do also look out for the audio icon in the corner of the screen. That will tell you which device the audio is coming from. And I'll also try to leave some timestamps down below because this will be an in-depth, long video. Currently using the front-facing cameras. We can film at 4K from the S20 FE, but only 1080p from the Pixel. Come on, Google, you should have given us 4K. I'm going to test out stabilization, but I'm going to switch to 1080p on both just to make things fair for front-facing stabilization. Right, so for the stabilization test, we're at 1080p on both devices. I am walking and I'm gonna now run. We're now testing video from the rear-facing cameras on both devices. We are at 4K, 30 frames a second. And we're gonna test out stabilization at 4K, so I'm just walking right now. Generally, if you're vlogging, this is what you'll be doing. And just to test a bit of an extreme, we're just gonna run. Now, we can go to the ultra-wide cameras on both. And again, we are at 4K. You can see what the difference is like here. And we're going to test out stabilization with the ultra-wide cameras. So once again, just a light walk and now, all right. The final thing we're going to test for video is the zoom. So we do have 3 times optical zoom on the S20 FE. We've got digital zoom on the Pixel. So you're at 3 times on both right now. Now we can go in further on the Samsung up to 12 times. You can only go up to 5 times on the Pixel. A quick test at 4K 60 frames a second as well, for those of you who are interested in seeing that. We're walking right now and just for a quick extreme stabilization test. Quick low light video test for those interested. Now the text. Move slightly more. I'm just gonna walk a little bit for low light video. Quick autofocus test on the Pixel 5. Very, very fast. Same test on the FE. Also seems to be doing fine. So that was the video. Before we move on to images, if you are liking what you're seeing so far and you want to see more videos like this, then be sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon. It will mean a lot to me. Let's now have a look at what we're working with. So for the front-facing cameras, the S20 FE does have a higher resolution, but generally you're going to be shooting at around 10 megapixels anyway, so that does make it quite similar. And for the rear-facing cameras, we have a dual rear-facing camera on the Pixel. On the S20 FE, we actually have 3 rear-facing cameras. So both have a primary camera as well as an ultra-wide camera. The Pixel does have a higher resolution ultra-wide camera, but the S20 FE actually has a much wider field of view. And the S20 FE also has a 3x zoom camera, a dedicated optical zoom camera. This is something that you don't have on the Pixel. Now, all images that you see have been shot on automatic to keep things as fair as possible. However, the S20 FE does have a pro photo as well as a pro video mode. So if you are somebody who likes to tweak your settings and things like that, that option is available out of the box straight away on the S20 FE. Right, now let's have a look at the images. So when it comes to the primary camera, I think both perform really well in good light. We do see some differences, however. The S20 FE does tend to go more towards the vibrant side. It does pull out the colors a little bit more. On this example, you can see that there is a hint of blue in the clouds, which really wasn't there because it was a very gray day. But nevertheless, the S20 FE tries to give you what some may call a bit more of a pleasing shot, whereas the Pixel does give you much more natural tones. And here's another shot. Here I do prefer the Pixel. If we look towards where the sun's coming from, we are getting some pink color coming on the S20 FE. But the Pixel is overall, I think, doing a better job. But nevertheless, both are pretty decent here. Now here's a situation with very tricky dynamic range. We've got a lot of sunlight coming in from the background, and here I do prefer the Pixel, which has maintained the highlights in the clouds more compared to the S20 FE, while still having detail in the foreground in the shadow areas. So I did find myself leaning more towards the Pixel on lots of outdoor shots with the primary camera. However, as soon as we switched to the ultra-wide camera, for me, it was a very easy pick with the S20 FE, and that is because we get a much wider field of view. And for me, that's really what ultra-wide cameras are about, capturing a lot more into your shots. Here's another example. I just think the S20 FE is giving you a much more pleasing shot with that ultra-wide camera. And I also found that it does give you better dynamic range. So here you can see that is the same tricky situation where you've got a lot of light coming in from the background, but the S20 FE has balanced that much better compared to the Pixel. Another advantage that you do get on the S20 FE is that optical zoom camera. So here is a shot, 2x on the Pixel, 3x on the S20 FE. These are just the standard buttons that you get, so I just thought let's just keep it fair. And the S20 FE, a much sharper image. Now we can go to the maximum digital zoom of the Pixel, which is 7x. And if we compare that to, say, the 10x of the S20 FE, the S20 FE, much cleaner. You can actually read the sign over here, whereas you really can't make out the text on the Pixel. On the S20 FE, you can go in even further though. So you can go in 20x and even up to 30x. Now, I'm not somebody who really shoots at 20 or 30x. I think the results are not really usable when it comes to sharing images on social media and things like that. But hey, they can be useful if maybe you need to read a sign in the distance. However, zoom, hands down the S20 FE. Here's another example. So this is standard. Then we go to 3x on both. You can notice that the S20 FE is giving you a much sharper image. Then if you go to 7x on the Pixel versus 10x, that is a really good shot actually. I'm very impressed with the 10x zoom on the S20 FE. Now, can go even further. So here is 20x and it's still a decent image. I gotta say, it's a decent image. I personally wouldn't go over 10x, but even at 20x, you're getting a decent image. And yes, the S20 FE gets a clear win when it comes to zoom. Now for low light, things are a little bit more interesting. So here, I do prefer the S20 FE. I think the colors are better maintained. The Pixel is a bit more on the yellow side. And if you look towards the text, the S20 FE does seem to be sharper. So I do prefer the S20 FE here. Now, if you use the ultra-wide cameras, the S20 FE does seem to be sharper, but there's a lot of artifacting in the clouds. So there is noise on the Pixel, but the S20 FE is doing some processing and that's really obvious in the clouds. So I think I'm gonna call this one a bit of a draw. Now, this is a very tricky situation because we've got a dark environment, but we've got a lot of light coming here from this Bentley showroom. And here, the S20 FE doing much better. You can see a lot more of those details inside the showroom. It's not blown things out like the Pixel has. Now, using the ultra-wide cameras in low light, the S20 FE does seem to be doing a better job with the showroom. But again, there is a lot of that process artifacting going on in the clouds. Whereas the Pixel, although it is noisy, it's not giving you anything that looks quite artificial. Now, in indoor low light shots, I do prefer the Pixel here actually. It's a brighter image, you've got more shadow detail. So this is interesting. It looks like the Pixel performs better indoors in low light, whereas the S20 FE seems to overall perform better outdoors in low light. Now let's look at some portraits. So we actually have some key differences here because the S20 FE actually gives you a wider angle of view. So it is using that primary camera. The Pixel is trying to give you more of a traditional portrait, so it is cropping in. And I do prefer this angular view on the Pixel a lot more compared to the S20 FE, but this might come down to your personal preference. Now, in terms of edges and in terms of the portraits themselves, I think both are doing a really good job. They have both got the area in between my arm and just generally very, very good. Happy with this. The Pixel also gives you a 1.3 times crop to give you even more of a portrait look. This is something, again, that I do like. It's not as sharp as the main one, but again, I do like having this option. This is something that you don't have on the S20 FE. Here's another portrait. Once again, the difference is in angle, but I just want you to look at the edges. I think both are doing a very, very good job. I do prefer the Pixel here. If you look at my skin tones, they are much better maintained. The S20 FE is going more towards that yellow side because I am under direct sunlight. And this is something that I notice Samsung phones do a lot if you are on direct sunlight. Once again, the Pixel does allow you to get that further crop, which gives you more of a portrait look, which I do like. Again, it's not as sharp, I would say, as the main image, but I do like having that option. Now let's look at some selfies. And for selfies, I mean, generally it was pretty much an easy pick for me. I think the Pixel just takes very, very good selfies. Skin tones are much more accurate. Here you can see that Samsung is doing its traditional thing where it is softening up the skin a little bit even when you do switch off beauty mode. And it is making me look fairer than I actually am, which I am definitely not a fan of. Now here is another example. Once again, we do have a bit of sunlight coming in. So the S20 FE has put me more on the yellow side, whereas the Pixel has maintained my natural brown color, which I am proud of. So, you know, the Pixel definitely for me is doing better here. Now, this is a very tricky situation. We obviously have a lot of light coming in from the background and both cameras have handled things very differently. So in the S20 FE's defense, it has exposed the background correctly, so it's not blown anything out. But then you can barely see me because I am completely in the shadows. Whereas the Pixel has kind of noticed that, hey, this is a person, so let me prioritize the exposure of the person rather than the background. So although it has blown out things in the background a little bit, I do prefer this image much more because, hey, at least you can see me. Now looking at portraits, I think in terms of edges, both are doing okay overall. I do see some issues near my sunglasses, but again, I just prefer the Pixel image a lot more. It is a lot sharper and it does give you much more accurate colors. Here's another example. Now here the Pixel has kind of given a bit of a hue to my top. I think the black on my top is better here on the S20 FE. In terms of edges, I think both are doing an overall good job. The Pixel, once again, very, very sharp as it does. Now, finally, some low light selfies. So here's using both smartphones just like that. And the Pixel doing better here. It's a sharper image overall. The S20 FE quite soft and it has washed things out quite a bit. Now, both smartphones do have the night mode from the front-facing camera as well, which I tend not to use that much because you have to kind of like stay still for a good few seconds while it captures everything, which is a little bit weird to do. But here, the S20 FE, I think, is doing a better job. It's a sharper image in capturing that longer exposure. The Pixel has blurred things out a little bit. Now, when it comes to the front-facing flash, Samsung devices generally tend to kind of like wash everything out, give you a big flash. So you can see even though there is more light in the foreground, I'm not a fan of this shot. I do look very washed out, whereas the Pixel is actually giving a very, very good low light front facing shot. So I do prefer the Pixel here. Right, so those are the results. What are my conclusions? Well, overall, I think both did do really good. primary camera images, I think both are very, very good, although I did lean towards the Pixel more because of the more natural colors, whereas the S20 FE, which some of you may prefer, does go towards more vibrant colors. Now, the ultra-wide camera, it was the S20 FE for me. You've got a wider field of view. You've also got overall better dynamic range. Zoom, again, just a clear win for the S20 FE. You've got optical zoom versus digital zoom. For portraits, I think both actually did really good in terms of edge detection. Of course, you've got the different angles of view. I prefer the Pixel. You might prefer the S20 FE. But one thing that I think the Pixel does do better, hands down, is skin tones. So that is something that I did like. When it came to low lights, it was a bit of a draw in certain situations. I would say outdoors, I preferred the S20 FE. Indoors, I preferred the Pixel. And for video, I think it was very, very close. I think both record great quality video. Stabilization was also really good on both. For low light video as well, I did prefer the Pixel. If you look at whenever I'm moving in the low light video, everything kind of goes fuzzy and out of focus on the S20 FE, whereas things are better maintained on the Pixel. Now, front-facing camera. For video, the S20 FE does have, firstly, 4K. It's also got a wider field of view, which I do like, but the Pixel did have better colors and it was also more stable. For selfies, photos, I did prefer the Pixel overall. Even though the S20 FE did do okay in certain situations, I think most situations you're going to get better skin tones and colors, as well as lots of sharp details on the Pixel. For slow motion, I think the S20 FE does get the advantage. You firstly got 1080 at 240 frames a second versus 720, and you also have the 720p super slow motion, an option that's not available on the Pixel. Now for audio, you can go back and have a listen. I've listened a few times, and for me, my pick is the S20 FE. I think you just had better sounding audio and you also had better noise cancellation. In particular, if you put some headphones on and you listen to the clip of me outdoors at night when it is very quiet, you can hear more of a hiss on the Pixel, whereas the S20 FE was much cleaner. That's what I think. What do you guys think? Do drop me a comment below. Let me know which your pick was overall. If you want to see lots more images from lots of different devices, then do give me a follow on Instagram. I'm at SuperSaf. I post very regularly on there. And if you enjoyed this video and found it useful, then a thumbs up and a subscribe would be appreciated. These camera comparisons, as you know, take a very, very long time to do. And there is going to be lots more SuperSaf style content coming up. So be sure to also hit that bell icon. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on SuperSaf TV, and I'll see you next time.